What's up, YouTube family? It's CJ with the Centipede Grass channel. It has gotten hot down here in Georgia, and it's time for you to feed your grass, time for you to fertilize. And I just want to give out some tips for any of you that have decided to take over your fertilization and, kind of DIY your yard this year. Just a few things you need to think about before you start to add these fertilizers, especially from big box stores to your yard, to give you the best chance to be successful with your lawn care this season. The first thing you're going to need to know before you go to fertilize your lawn this year is what type of grass you have. I deal with southern grasses, and the four main types that you're going to have in your yard are Centipede, St. Augustine, Bermuda, or Zoysia. So the first thing you're going to need to do is, pull up a picture of one of those four and match it up with the type of grass that you have. Centipede and St. Augustine are pretty similar in how they look. But the St. Augustine, the leaves are much thicker, the stolons are much thicker. It's just a bigger, thicker, more vigorous grass. And I would kind of say that the Zoysia and the Bermuda look similar, but they really kind of don't. You can pretty much tell if you have Bermuda grass or Zoysia grass. I guess the only two that would kind of be similar is that Centipede and that St. Augustine. But regardless, you're going to want to figure out what type of grass you have, because they all have different feeding requirements. And if you have a mixture of grass, two ways to go about that is, what's the more dominant grass? So what do you have more of? And if it's kind of an even mixture, I would probably try to feed towards the more aggressive grass. Like if I had a mixture of some Bermuda and some Centipede, Bermuda is much faster growing, is much more aggressive than Centipede. So I would probably tend to feed more towards that Bermuda. It's probably going to end up taking over, the Centipede more so than the Centipede would take over the Bermuda. So those are the only kind of little differences or intricacies that are going to be important. But besides that, step number one is to know what type of grass you have, first and foremost. Now, this is the Centipede Grass channel, and I mostly deal with Centipede grass. So Centipede grass needs 2 pounds of nitrogen per year. So during the growing season, anywhere from about April, I guess even as early as March, but I probably wouldn't start until April, all the way up until September, October-ish. You want to get 2 pounds of nitrogen on that yard. And any fertilizing plan is going to depend on the amount of nitrogen. It's what makes the grass grow, right? It's what gives it that green color, what pushes that top growth. So all fertilizer plants are going to depend on the amount of nitrogen. Now, Centipede has the lowest requirement of the southern grasses. If you have Bermuda grass, you're going to need to get 4 to 6 pounds of nitrogen on that yard a year. If you have St. Augustine grass, Zoysia grass, you're going to need to get 3 to 4 pounds of nitrogen on that yard a year. And the thing with the nitrogen, it's all about expectation. The higher your expectation is for your yard, the less weeds you want, the thicker you want the growth, you're going to have to feed towards the higher end of that range, right? So I could probably get by feeding Centipede a pound and a quarter of nitrogen a year. But if I want it to perform at its top, at its max, I'm going to need to feed it that 2 pounds. Same thing with any of them. You got a low end range that's if you don't really have high expectations for your yard. If you want it to look decent, you don't want to get a letter from the HOA, that's fine with you. You can go on the lower end of the range, which of course is going to be less expensive. And just get by, and the grass is not going to die, right? But if you want it to perform at its peak, at the top of its capabilities, and you want it to look as good as it can possibly look, you're always going to want to be around the top of the range. Second thing you're going to want to do is to know what your grass actually needs. And the best way to do this was with a soil test. All grass is going to need nitrogen, so that's not the question. But the other two numbers on the bag, anytime you get a fertilizer bag, you see those 3 numbers. You're going to see nitrogen is the first number, phosphorus is the second number, potassium is the third number, what they call NPK, right? You're going to want to know if your yard needs phosphorus or potassium, right? the first number, the nitrogen, like we already discussed, is going to be determined by the type of grass you have. It's going to need that every year because nitrogen is so volatile. It's in the soil and it's out of the soil. So it's always going to have to be replaced. But phosphorus and potassium sit in the soil, and they make up the structure of the grass more so than the nitrogen does, right? So they're in the plant, all right? So they're not as volatile, and you may not have to put them down as often as you do the nitrogen. So you're going to want a soil test to know if your soil is high or low in phosphorus, if it's high or low in potassium, so that you're putting down the right amount of these things. You know, if you put down too much of a nutrient, it can lock up other nutrients and it can lead to some kind of toxicity in the soil. So the second thing you're going to want to know after you know what type of grass you have is what your soil actually needs before you go to put down a fertilizer. So just looking at my soil report, as far as my macronutrients, I was pretty adequate in everything. Could have been more, but I definitely was far from deficient. So, you know, I handle my yard organically. So my organic fertilizer of choice this year was actually soybean meal. We have a feed store not far from my house. I kind of stay out on the outskirts, what some people call the country. So we have a feed store close to my house, and I go there and I just buy soybean meal, the same that, you know, they feed the cows and other livestock. And I put that on the lawn as an organic fertilizer source, and it works very well for me. I use it for myself and I use it for my customers. That soybean meal kind of has, I think the analysis on that is like a 7-1-2. So 7% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and 2% potassium. They say that the ideal ratios for any fertilizer blend that you're going to get is a 4-1-2, right? So that pretty much fits in that range for the most part. I mean, I guess the nitrogen could be a little 1% higher, but it's close enough. So like I said, I use soybean meal, and I believe in taking care of yards organically. Of course, that's no secret at this point. But no matter what fertilizer you use, you know, even if you use a synthetic fertilizer, once you know what your soil needs, that's what you want to apply. So with the soybean meal, I got my nitrogen, and I wasn't low on phosphorus or potassium, but it's enough in there to keep me adequate, right? It's enough in there, I guess what we would call a maintenance rate. Now, if my lawn was low in phosphorus, I would have to reassess that. I would have to get a fertilizer or pick a fertilizer that had a higher dosage of phosphorus in it. Like bone or blood meal or something like that, if I wanted to go organic. Or I could put down a synthetic super triphosphate or anything like that. But no matter what, like I said, I want to feed my grass according to whatever the soil test said that I was deficient in. Now, the interesting thing about the soybean meal, this right here is a Nova. It is a brand that I got from the Anderson store. They're a great company. I like a lot of their products. During the wintertime, I actually showed you their product, the human chart. That's what they sell with the DG particles. So we talked about that, and they sell good products. But this bag, this 50-pound bag was, man, this bag was like $80, I want to say. And as you can see, the ratio is 7-1-2. This bag is essentially soybean meal. All right. Here is an actual bag of actual soybean meal. You know, no branding on it, no nothing, just a regular brand. And I paid $18 for this bag. It has the same 7-1-2 ratio, and essentially it's the same exact product without advertising. So of course, I run a company. I want to always go with the most cost effective. I'm going to pick the $18 bag over the, I don't know, this bag, like I said, it was like $80 or something like that. It was very expensive and very hard to fit into a fertilizing plan. Because I'm doing 2 pounds a year on these Centipede lawns, the first time that I applied, I put down 1 pound. 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And throughout the year, every month throughout the growing season, I'll be spraying some kelp meal, which has a little bit of nitrogen in it, not much. But that'll give me some of the nitrogen that I need throughout the year. Okay, I'll spray that in May, June, July, August, maybe even September, throughout the growing season, just to give the grass a constant little, boost of nitrogen and micronutrients. If we look back at my soil report, you'll see that I was low in manganese, and this kelp meal has a good bit of micronutrients in it. So that's how I'm going to address that. Instead of putting on a synthetic manganese, I'm just going to constantly give the grass a small dose of all the micronutrients as well as a few of the macronutrients. I think it only has, that kelp meal has a little bit of nitrogen, a little bit of potassium, I want to say. But I'll constantly feed that throughout the year. Also, if you return your grass clippings to your lawn, that'll give you at least, some people say 15%, some people say 25% of the amount of nitrogen that you need throughout the year. It'll recycle it back into the lawn. So I won't have to actually apply 2 pounds. Some of that I'll get back just by using my mulch kit on my mower and leaving the grass clippings on the lawn. So my plan is, like I said, I've already applied 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. I'll hit it with that kelp, which is pretty cheap on Amazon. I'll show you the brand that I use. I'll hit it with that kelp throughout the year, right? Every month throughout the growing season, just to help with the stress and all. And at the end of the year, I'll probably apply another ½ pound. All right, so that's my plan so far. And that'll give me all of my nitrogen from the year. A little bit applied through the soybean meal, about 1.5 pounds applied through the soybean meal, and then the rest between the kelp and the grass clippings. Now, if you have a different type of grass with higher requirements, you're not going to be able to use that plan. Every time, you should not be applying more than 1,000, more than 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. So if you have like Bermuda grass that requires the more, you need to get 4 to 5, 6 pounds of nitrogen every growing season. You're probably going to be applying 1 pound of that soybean meal or whatever fertilizer you choose. You're probably going to be applying 1 pound every month. Yeah, you would be applying 1 pound every month. And if you had like a St. Augustine or a zoysia and you only needed 3 to 4 pounds, you have to work out a plan, but you may apply 1 pound every other month or so throughout the growing season. Of course, keeping your clippings on the lawn, and maybe the kelp or some kind of other fish emulsion or something like that, something that you can, maybe kind of feed it, spoon feed it constantly throughout at kind of like a maintenance rate to make sure that you get your required amount of nitrogen per year. So depending on what type of grass you have, you would have to work that plan out. If you have any specific questions, drop it down in the comments and we can definitely talk through a plan, to help you be successful this year. One more quick tip, if you notice some of your neighbors, you may have noticed like when they put down their synthetic fertilizer that they stripe their lawn. You see the dark strip and then the light strip and then the dark strip, like a striped shirt or something like that. One way that I get around that is if I'm going to put down 1 pound of product per 1,000 square feet, I'll put ½ pound in one direction, ½ pound vertical, ½ pound horizontal, right? Just to make sure I have an even spread throughout and kind of avoid that striped shirt look. It's a little unattractive, so just a little tip. So now I know my grass type. I know exactly what my lawn needs. Now I need to pick a bag of fertilizer. Remember what we said about the 3 numbers: NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Once I figure out what my requirement is, the actual numbers on the bag don't really matter as long as you do the math correctly. When I say they don't matter, I mean to the extent that if I need phosphorus, as long as there's a phosphorus number there, I can determine how much math, the math I need to do to make sure I put down the right amount. So in the case of my yard, remember, I didn't really need any phosphorus. I didn't really need any potassium besides a maintenance rate. So we chose the soybean meal, which we already said was a 7-1-2 analysis. my yard is 10,000 square feet. That is actually another thing you'll need to know. Didn't mention that, but you will need to know the square footage of your yard. You don't need to be smack dab on the head, but you need to be pretty close, right? Remember, area is length times width. So if you have one of those measuring sticks, that's cool. But even if you use a tape roller or whatever you use, a measuring tape is what I was trying to say, or whatever you use to measure your yard, you need to get a rough but pretty good estimate of how many square feet your yard is. But using my yard as an example, we have the fertilizer bag. It is a 50-pound bag of 712 analysis, right? And we're trying to put 1 pound per 1,000 on 10,000 square feet. All right, so I'm going to take my 50-pound bag and I'm going to multiply it by 0.07 or 7%. And that comes out to 3.5, right? So that means that that bag has 3.5 pounds of nitrogen in it, right? So I'm only going to be, in one bag, I'm only going to be able to put 1 pound on 3,500 square feet, right? If I'm putting 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. So just by doing the math, if I do the 50-pound bag divided by 3.5, I think it comes out like 14.2. I went ahead and rounded it up just so I can use easy numbers, and I needed to put down 14 to 15 pounds of that product per 1,000 square feet to get a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, right? So if I'm doing 15 pounds per 1,000 and I have a 10,000 square foot yard, then I needed 150 pounds of that product, right, to put down on the yard. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm using 50-pound bags. So I basically, 3 bags. I need to put 3 bags of soybean meal evenly throughout my yard. A bag and a half vertical, a bag and a half horizontal to reach my requirement of 1 pound per 1,000. Remember, the bags were $18 a piece. So for a little under $60 or so, I got my fertilizing that I needed. And once I do the half a pound later in the year, it'll be $30. It'll be cheaper. And you know, if you're just doing this as a homeowner, 1 bottle of that kelp meal, I think it was $36 or something like that, that'll get you through the entire year. So you can handle your nitrogen requirements with a Centipede lawn. Remember, it is the lowest amount of maintenance out of all the grasses. So it's the cheapest one, but you'll get all of your fertilizing done for under $100-something. You know, if you decide to do it yourself. Now, as far as spreader settings, that is something that you're going to have to toggle with to figure out. It has to go evenly across the yard. So if I was doing this with my lawn and my lawn was 10,000 square feet, I would have a test patch. If I knew that 1 bag would put a pound on 3,500 square feet, I would just measure out 3,500 square feet and see what spreader setting I would have to put it on to get a pound evenly, right? And that's going vertical and horizontal. So I would try to do a half of that bag going vertical, half of that bag going horizontal to evenly cover that 3,500 square feet. And whatever that spreader setting was, then I would know that, you know, that will work for the rest of the yard. And that's kind of like unfortunately, it's a guess and check method. Unless you have a bag that says what you know, if you're using Scott's or something and you have a Scott's feeder and it tells you what setting to put it on, you're going to have to kind of guess and check. So if I did that, you know, if I measured out that 3,500 square feet and I had the spreader on 12, right, and there was still some left in the bottom, depending on how much was left, I would make an educated guess. Maybe I'll go up to 13, maybe I'll go up to 14, and I'll do it on the rest of the yard. And as long as there's not a whole bunch of product left, you know, then you know you got close. And that's just information that you write somewhere, put it in your notes, and you log that so that you know going forth, this is the spreader setting that I needed on, you know, whenever I put down this product. Different products have different prill sizes and all type of things. So it's kind of different for each product. It's best, you know, to get a few products that you like and kind of just stick with those. I do realize that the explanation may have been either confusing or, you know, not quite delivered to where everybody can understand it. So again, if you have any questions or you want to further inquire, put it down in the comments. I'll always respond, and we'll figure it out. So my buddy Taylor with Smiley Lawn Care in South Carolina always asks, does it get the yard thick? Does it get it green? You know, the organic fertilizer, he's a little skeptical on it. And I get that, but it does a pretty good job, you know, for me. I mean, there are some weeds in here. You see a little clover and all, but for the most part, I think it does a great job. I think it does just as good as a synthetic. Now, it doesn't work as fast. And in some areas there, you know, there's the color is not as even as fast. It depends on how fast the grass is going to break it down. But it works great as far as sticking in the lawn and giving you a nice color. Centipede grass is supposed to be like an apple green, so I'm not going for a dark green. That bag doesn't have any iron in it or anything. If I wanted to green it up somewhere, I could. And if you look at these black spots in the yard, that is actually something called slime mold. We've had rain and humid weather, and slime mold naturally pops up. Now, my yard is the only yard in the neighborhood that has it, and that's because I feed my yard organics. Slime mold is actually a good sign that you have good organics in your yard. But yeah, I've recently fed, so it hasn't, I'm sure spots in the yard haven't completely broken down the soybean meal yet. This is my wife's garden. She has to kind of do some de-weeding, but her dahlias are looking really good. And if you remember the video that I showed you, the fungus patch that I had in my yard from the watering from my lovely neighbors, it's actually filled in really good. If I can go back and find a clip of that video, I'll sit it up beside this one. No, that's not my yard over there, but I'll sit it beside this one and you can see how that fungus patch filled in. Of course, I did not use any fungicides. I put some worm castings on it and let it heal itself. But yeah, the slime mold, it'll eventually disappear. It's just something, like I said, it naturally pops up. It's eating thatch, and it's just a sign that you have good, like I said, you have good organic matter in your yard. But for Taylor and everybody else who are a little skeptical on the organics, you can have a thick, beautiful lawn. And the good thing about this is it's constant, right? This is sustainable. I don't have to keep going to put down more fertilizer. It's in the soil. It's in the microorganisms that are in the soil. I'm not worried. Sorry about that. My phone overheated. I told you it was hot down here in Georgia. But I was just saying, you know, organics, in my opinion, is more sustainable. I won't be worrying about, you know, constantly having to apply nitrogen. I also won't be worried about pests and fungus and all of those things, you know, that my neighbors may worry about throughout the year. Because I'm using a program that, while not as fast, you know, and not as initially efficient, over time, is definitely cumulative and, in my opinion, more effective. But anyway, you know, if you're into organics, you're definitely in the right place. But even if you're just into DIY, you know, you want to kind of take care of your grass a little better this year yourself, you're still in the right place. So if you haven't subscribed yet, if this video was helpful to you, definitely consider subscribing. Please, you know, continue with the likes. That engagement definitely gets this video to more people, and so do the comments. The comments, it may help with the engagement and the algorithm, but I enjoy them as well. We've had some pretty good discussions. Some people who agree, some people who disagree, but no matter what, all of the conversation is helpful to me. You know, I learn, and hopefully anybody else who's reading the comments also learn. But it's time, you know, we're in our season as far as warm season grass grows. It's actively growing now, it's picking up, and I'm excited. Going to be a good year. So again, this is CJ with the Centipede Grass Channel in Georgia. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, peace.